Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because we are unpacking a truly fascinating and honestly urgent topic. We're diving straight into the incredibly complex intersection of partisan politics and judicial intervention in Nigeria. We're going to look at how these two worlds are colliding, the systemic risks it poses to democratic institutions, and what the experts say actually needs to be done about it. It's a compelling case study of the Nigerian Democratic Congress, or the NDC, and it reveals a whole lot about the fragile mechanics of democracy itself. Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap for today. We'll start with the NDC deregistration ruling, then look at the trend of a government by judges, identify the actual corruptors of democracy, explore exactly why these institutions are weak, and finally, lay out a blueprint for democratic reform. Section 1. The NDC deregistration ruling. So, the catalyst for this entire conversation is a recent ruling by a federal high court in Lokoja. Basically, this court set aside an earlier judgment that had originally forced the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, to register the Nigeria Democratic Congress. By tossing out that earlier decision, the court essentially deregistered the NDC, which is a major opposition party. The party has, as you might expect, vehemently kicked against this. They argue the trial court completely lacked the competence to revisit a final unappealed decision. Meanwhile, INEC is playing it safe, stating they're just studying the certified true copy of the judgment before making any next moves.
Naturally, a ruling of this magnitude sends massive shockwaves through the political landscape. Former Vice President and presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar reacted really strongly to this development. He warned that plotting to deregister a prominent opposition party like the NDC could literally pave the way for a one-party state. We're just reporting his perspectives here, but his reaction is a clear reflection of the incredibly high political stakes right now and the very real fear some have about a shrinking democratic space in the country.
In response to this massive judicial hurdle, political actors are mobilizing on a few different fronts. On one hand, you've got the purest legal approach. NDC spokesperson Oziah Director has committed to fighting the ruling at the appellate court, strictly following the hierarchy of the courts. On the other hand, you have a much more pragmatic political approach. Senator Seriake Dixon floated the idea of forming political alliances, but with the strict caveat that NDC candidates would have to be the ones fielded under that alliance platform. It's a fascinating look at how politicians maneuver, right? They're fighting in the courtroom while simultaneously prepping backup strategies in the political arena.
To really make sense of all this, we turn to the impartial analysis of Professor Anthony Keela, the director of the Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies. His diagnosis of the situation is absolutely crucial. He's very clear on this point. There is no concrete proof whatsoever to say someone in the ruling APC or the presidency sat down and deliberately manipulated this court ruling. But he emphasizes that the optics are undeniably bad. When a major opposition party gets deregistered, people are naturally going to suspect foul play. In a democracy, the mere appearance of a stifled opposition damages public trust, whether there's an actual conspiracy or not.
Section 2. A government by judges. This leads to a macro trend that Professor Keela is deeply concerned about. He warns against the excessive presence of the judiciary in the democratic process. He actually calls this a government by judges, or a kleptocracy. Basically, it's a system where the courts, rather than the actual voting public, decide political outcomes. Keela warns the bench directly that getting too tangled up in politics actually taints and corrupts the judiciary. He points out that courts can sometimes lack common sense in these matters. They give rulings in a vacuum, ignoring the massive real-world consequences of, say, wiping out a major political party with just one stroke of a pen. Which brings us to a pivotal question that every single citizen should be asking right now. Are judges deciding elections instead of voters? Think about it. When a regulator or a judge can eliminate a massive political entity before a single ballot is even cast, they are effectively rewriting the political landscape. It completely disrupts the foundational idea that winners should emerge because they successfully persuaded voters with their policies and programs. And this brilliantly illustrates a major clash of mentalities. In the current winner-takes-all mindset, Kyla calls this civic illiteracy. It's treating partisan politics like a ruthless football match where the only goal is to completely destroy your opponent. Contrast that with the democratic ideal mindset. Here, Kyla argues regulators and judges should view flawed political parties sort of like big banks that are too big to fail, or like flawed congregants in a church. If they mess up, you don't completely destroy them. You manage their flaws, you correct them, but you keep the institution alive because its existence is absolutely vital to the whole ecosystem.
Section 3. The Corruptors of Democracy.
Professor Keeler really does not mince words when describing where we're at today. He says, and I quote, "You have to be intellectually blind or morally mischievous not to see that the judiciary is weaponized." It's a powerful statement, and it underscores an undeniable reality in today's political climate. The courts are being actively used as tools to fight political battles that really should be resolved at the ballot box or inside the party structures.
But here is the really fascinating twist in his analysis. Even though the courts are being weaponized, the true corruptors of democracy are actually the politicians themselves. It's wildly ironic. You have these politicians who demand to be called distinguished or honorable, yet they run straight to the judges to solve internal party disputes because they are simply too weak to manage it themselves. Instead of handling things like gentlemen and ladies, they try to overrule their rivals and destroy people's careers through the courts, corrupting the entire system from the inside out.
Section 4. Why institutions are weak.
So, why does the judiciary put up with this? Well, even with judicial service commissions in place, Keeler describes the judiciary as a paper tiger. They're often way too slow and silent when judicial overreach happens. But he points out exactly why they lack independence. The executive branch buys their official cars. The executive branch pays for their housing. The executive branch controls their nominations. Their entire livelihood, social status, and career advancement is completely tethered to the very politicians they are supposed to be regulating.
Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast between theory and reality. In constitutional theory, the judiciary is a fiercely independent, co-equal third arm of government. But in Nigerian reality, the judiciary is financially and structurally dependent on elected politicians. You just cannot have true independence when one arm of government is literally financing and nominating the heads of another arm of government.
Section 5. Blueprint for Democratic Reform.
Identifying the problem isn't enough, right? We have to look at Keeler's radical solutions. To stop judges from destabilizing democracy with sudden deregistration rulings, he proposes a strict new timeline for party registration. Step 1 is a standard open registration period. Step 2 is a final touch window to correct discrepancies and get into regulatory alignment. But Step 3 is the real game changer. Once that window closes and the party is registered, it gets absolute immunity from deregistration. Leadership can change, people can leave, but the institution itself cannot be touched or destroyed by a sudden court ruling. This guarantees long-term institutional stability.
Beyond that, we urgently need structural reform to detach the judiciary's lifeline from the executive. The current flaw, where judicial funding depends on the executive, has to be replaced with complete ironclad financial independence. Also, the current system of presidents and governors nominating judges needs a massive overhaul. Keeler suggests parallel paths, meaning absolutely zero executive nominations for the bench. The judiciary has to be completely self-sustaining in its appointments if it ever wants to stand on equal footing with the legislative and executive powers.
This all boils down to Keeler's core philosophy, which we can call the ultimate democratic rule. He argues that if we want truly strong institutions, people who are elected purely by popularity, the politicians, should never be in charge of people who have progressed by merit, like judges or the Inspector General of Police. When popularity dictates the careers of merit-based officials, the entire system is fundamentally compromised.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought to close out today's explainer. How can any democracy survive if the umpires are entirely dependent on the very players they are meant to regulate? It's a provocative question, and one we absolutely have to answer if the democratic fabric is going to be preserved. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this complex, vital issue today. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the structures behind the headlines, and I'll catch you next time.